Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's present. It's super pretty good for me. Alright, 당한솔이야 가르치네 디기주야다 동아세야 당한솔 기디 나가솔 동아를 고고 말에 기디나 대화도 고고와 세상에 미나다 dun조 수이네 지나 되네 인자 디기주야기 탑람다 동아세기 탑람디 나가솔 요요 말에 지사다 되네 인자 나가솔이야 되네 디고 나가솔 냠면 제야리야다스 또 디기주야 동아 세디 낭 삼로토네 삼로다제 요아다제 세고 디기주야 동아 세디 지오레스 데네자다 다 삼로다데 삼로나려야 안 삼로 강아 용야게 라나 셴니가라 강아 유기유야게 삼로 가르카리 디파가 좀 어쩌지 디파 봉국을 매가서 그래서 제자다 나줄레 라신니가라 디기주야기 다 samlode karayores dunga seya da digituye samlode karayores yesen dingoteje dinganzolia nyamselengo guresen ondusene moteje gorwada de nyatsu nyamlen je gores nyam digituye ke samlo karayes digiyoya ke samlo karayele tene digiyon gore samlo kanestana digi dunga se gore di samlo dinganzu ya gom je ne nyamlen je ya gombre tang gores gore.
All of us here, and not just here, but all humans, and in fact all beings, humans, animals, and unseen beings, are at a fundamental exactly the same. We all want happiness. None of us want to experience any problems or difficulties. And here we've come together, we've met the complete and unmistaken method that will bring about such a state. And this method, if we were to present it very briefly, is about accumulating virtue or strengthening virtuous minds and purifying non-virtue or eliminating non-virtuous minds and their seeds. And from this description it should be clear that the way to achieve lasting happiness is to transform our mind. And in order to do so, again, to present it in a very brief and simple way, we need to, on the one hand, identify the coarse as well as subtle problems and difficulties that we experience as well as others and their causes. And then on the other hand, we need to think about varying types of happiness, in particular a happiness that is not transitory, that doesn't change momentarily, a happiness that is lasting and stable, as well as the causes that lead to that.
Dine da di samlo dige chasa ngana zugura yore sruat dungo yoyeki da jasen ikala kanga de sem de ngana zugura yede bare da rani de dewa de shenla dige jasen ikala dige juye samlo de ngana zugura zawa ngana zugi shise de yoye bare ina da ngana zugi di delya ane jige nang samlo nang pa shera 심주 지고 말하는 게 디네 지게 잘라시나 파 치용어보 튕긴랴 튕긴 디룹나 대한저 디기 용그레 튕긴 디제나 가서 디기 룹도 강아 디 매버서 샤베나 먼저 강아 세투 그랬으면 비기 칠로 파냐야데 칠로 디게 아니 지게 유일에 안 삼다제 디바 매버서나 강아 세그레 디네 강아 용구도 디 매버서나 강아 세그레스 아니 디레 텐데 디기오네 디만도 지 약고 줍네 니네 디기 줍투 그랬으면 비기 삼다진 칠로 방외비 칠롱어볼 그냥 삼담마도 낭 삼론 발셈 나와 내 삼론 나라 디니스도 디게 강한 책이도 디 삼론도 매봐 소고도 내 셈 나라 삼론 디니스도 디 삼론 디게 간줄 디기도 디가 야게 땅고 선비게 삼론 디 가지고 비슷한 거 말아.
The source of all the suffering that we experience is found on our own continuum. But so too is the source of all our happiness that we experience. It's found on our own continuum. And whilst this is the case, it's almost entirely unrecognized in society. In fact, in society, the emphasis is placed on overcoming problems and achieving happiness through focusing on the external world, on the material world. It's viewed that our source of our problems is outside of us. The source of our happiness is outside of us. And if we focus on changing, on transforming the material world, our life will be much happier. But yet we know from our own development in our life and what we observe, that even those who are seen to have the most favorable of outer circumstances, happiness is not achieved. So this recognition that this actual source of our problems and difficulties lies within, as well as the source of happiness lies within, this is largely unrecognized in society. Hence, our mental effort, as well as our physical endeavors, are largely focused on the external world.
Tadi kapre yungor lunga chesa lunga ki shenle nubigi jawat chebaina shenle nuje shenla kangati gores digi nan sosolina kangati gores chesa rashi nigala kanga yongal mado pensi got yungo mare jerwa chesa da lunga ge cheba shenle nubigi cheba de kanisli gores nanga samlo thon ligor samlo le shenle chewe sambada shenle nube chego sembe samlo chebaina 디 토네 룽아기 쮸바 트엔첸 샬라 요바인 거레스 세상 디 뇌들레스 세상 당아도 룽아기 쮸바다 현래 체외 삼바 뇌비 삼바디 파유 디가 거레스 그러다 가 거레스 디가 바이나 룽아기 쮸바디 남바데리 샬라 뇌발리 요고말 당기 군롱게 셈 샬라 체외 삼바메나 룽아 쮸바리 말 디가 거레스 디가 거wen산 안에 가스가 거레라네 당보 그랬음 당고 생각을 Lunga use Michel and never check me, sebe, some lodi, patangore, sedi, disungore.
It's not sufficient merely to hear the theory of the Dharma. One needs to recognize it as true for oneself. For example, as we looked at on the first day and again yesterday, that the first instruction in this text is that of ethical restraint. The commitment to not harm others, not through our physical behavior, not through our verbal communication, or even our way of thinking. And we can perhaps understand the importance of doing this, yet we continue to harm others, sometimes intentionally, sometimes carelessly. If we think about our own lived experience, we can recognize how all too often we have acted in a way that has brought harm to others. And this is despite that when we reflect, we recognize that actually it brings harm to ourselves as well. Our own harmful behavior harms others and ourselves. And so why is it that we harm others? Why is it that even when we have recognized that a particular form of physical behavior or verbal communication brings harm to others, that we find it so difficult to stop? This is because our mental training is lacking. Harmful behavior or behavior follows from a mental intention. And to the extent that the mind is untrained, to the extent that the mind lacks knowledge and training in that knowledge, we have harmed others, and we will continue to do so. Here then we need to recognize that our physical and verbal harmful behavior is motivated by our mind, our way of thinking. Therefore, this is where our focus needs to be. Whilst we need to stop physical and verbal harmful behavior, our focus needs to be on the motivating mind. And when we apply ourselves well, and have brought about a transformation of our way of thinking, it will be as if we have created a physical barrier within ourselves, a physical barrier to harming others. We will find it impossible to conceive of acting in a way that may bring harm to others, or speaking to or about others in a way that is harmful. Such a transformation is possible, and it comes about through focusing on our mental developments.
Andinenza, Tangazu Gula, Samnale, Shenle, Nibi Samba, Tsivi, Samba de Anzu Yorwada. The Shenle, Lunga Yusumi, Shell never jigmes and be some of the Anzu Yorwada. Some Niga Anzu Yurida. Anzu Yarketa, Hisayore, Uni, Shiza Mena Yagita or Yomarwa. She says, no Sabonot, Stawa Uni Mena Yagita Merwa. Just Sabonot, Tawa Unidelia, Yagita Yorwa. Tinizang. Anzugula, Shenle, Tsivi, Samba says some of the Anzugula Yore. Shenle, and never jigme as a some of the Niga Yore. Niga Yore de, and then Anzulia, Bijida Gidima Ligis and Shenle, Nibi, Samba, some of the Gidina does Shuchawa, the Mali to Sigore. Shenle, never jigme as a patient, jigme as a some of the Nuarish, Nubal Masona, and teaching Chigor. Chesantang Anzug, Tanganz digi the pitching Anzula Karuk. Ratchigorsen, Gula, Shell and Nube Samba Chigore, Shell and Nube Chigme, some New Hores, Dingy, Karet Damgurelana, Shell and Nube Chigme, some Sutamgures, two deep Yaketan Hores, or Shella, Koi, Shell and Nube Chigme, some of the course, some of the Yakom, something combine, Cocaze, Nube Church in a chair job in a Shell and Nube Chig, some serious, somebody Marshu Chunchun to Wores. Chesa Dininza, Nubi Samba, Tsivi Samba, the Shuchunju Jovena, Lunga Gijibi, Shala Tewacheva, the Yungumares. The Lunga Gijibi, Shala Tewacheva, Mena, and Shala Nugumares, and the Rala Yakanga Mares. Benanga, Lugone, Shen Yukuma, good and Shala Sochevena, and then Pajanugore, D. Genjang Anzulegare, and then Yendoba Legend, Chike, Ju, Zanga Diada, Tim Diada, and then Yeno Diada, then Ungurua. Chesa Nugo Rashi Nigo, Tinza, someone needing around killing Niga Yor in Zada, Tsevi somebody Mevas Yogores, Lunga Jubadi Mevas Yogore, Tsevi Jubadi Mevas Yogore, Di Mevas Yogola, Nalo Kulu, Tsevi somebody Mevas Yogores, Di Meva Canas Yogores, Lunga Shalan Nova Chig Mes, Metsewa Chig Mes, somebody, Di Gomje Ya Gom Gore, Di Ya Gom has some coetides, Di Gomje Ya Shuk Church at Tabena. And then it's somebody Meva Chakore, serious members and Lunga Jubi Tsewa de Ungumares, Chesa, two in the Meva Sogores, Chesang Anzul Yobadi, Yahu de Tahoya Yargetan. Then the code Panmotoji by Meva Soga Dides, Manzoliada, Kasangazu, Lunga is near Jeb, near Chigmes, and some of the Yana Young to Tangur, said it, Tirada. She said, Lunga Jube, young Guno, Tsevi, somebody, Lunga Juba Liguro, Tsevi Juba Ligurova. She said, Tsevi, somebody, Papango, remember so good, yes. The Meva Serva, like Canis Meva Sorsine, Shanla Nubachi, Tsewachi, Messibe, somebody, Gomgores, the Yargeta Gomdron, called Meva Chakores.
It certainly is the case that for all of us we have on our continuum the imprints to harm others, the imprints that will lead to us speaking or acting physically in a way that brings harm to others. But equally, we also have the imprints not to harm others, the imprints of ethics, the imprints of restraining our mind. So we have both classes of imprints, both the virtuous as well as the unwholesome. Whichever we as individuals more tend towards is the one, that set, that class that we are more habituated to. Watching one's mind, one sees when one encounters a particular situation, is one more habituated to responding in a way that is unwholesome or a way that is wholesome. Recognizing that, we understand which of these two classes we are more habituated to. This also, though, shows that there is the possibility for change. And the text presents methods to bring about that change. And it comes about first through seeing the faults of harming others, of speaking badly to them or about them, or acting in a physical way that brings harm to others. And recognizing that the faults that come to oneself as well as to others, that's the first step, to intellectually understand this. The second then is to repeatedly reflect on the determination, I will not harm others. I do not want the suffering myself that will come from harmful behavior. For example, if one acts in an illegal manner, one will face legal consequences. And also, I don't want to add to the burden of suffering of others. I don't want to be the person who speaks to others in a way that disturbs their mind, that makes them unhappy, for example. So these are the two areas that we need to reflect on. The faults of harming others, and then reflecting on this again and again and again, make this very deep within us. And if we, to the extent that we do this, it will become to us inconceivable that we'll harm others. For example, if right now we are in a situation where we're alone and there's something that we desire that isn't ours, and we think, oh, I can take this, no one will know, and we will justify it in some way, perhaps taking a delicious chocolate and thinking, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, no one will know. Now we may have this way of thinking, but if we train well, such an act, even a small one like that, will seem inconceivable for us to do. And in this way, or in such a case, we have created this deep inner barrier to harming others. And the accompanying meditation to being intellectually aware of the faults of harming others, as well as then reflecting on this deeply, is reflecting on the benefits of benefiting others, of being useful in their life. And as we strengthen this one side, it serves to also weaken the other.
Nadondala Nanzule Tivi Sambata and Shanlia Yobachime Sembe Samlo Niga Yudibare, Chesantang Anzule Yarget Tango de Karetan Korelan, Manzo Mogoya de Carson Shanla Nubi, somebody Mogoya res, Dimeva Sugu Regere. Tadimeva Sola Canis Meva Suguri Lamna, and Shanla Nuba Chigme Sembe Samlo Chinganskil Yobadi, Di Gomchin Yargetan Yard Nuba Shukshanta Chertan. Somebody called Meva Ranchu Meva Chagris. Chesada, Donaning Body Ranzulet, Samlo Naloya, Shella Tivi, Sambachina Shella, Cheva Chigme, Samlo Ranzu, Niga Yudebare, Tini de Goya de Carre, Mogoya de Carrelana, Shella Tivi, Samba said Mogoya de Res. Tanganzul Goya de Carre, Digi Julia, Goya de Carresne, Shella never chick mess in some of the res. Dini insada, Shella never chick mess in some of the Ranzu Yobadi, Yana Yando Sandaja, Mo compared to Tavaina, Shella Tivi, somebody, Koran, Sosgil Yobadi, Giligi Manubichun to Wores.
We have these two classes of imprints or seeds on our continuum. We must need to recognize where our habituation lies and take that as an understanding that this is because we may be more habituated to one side than the other, we can change ourselves, we can transform ourselves. And we do this by nourishing a particular set of seeds. If we are habituated to unwholesome ways of acting, the more we do so, the more we think in this way, the more we nourish those seeds. So we need, all of us, to recognize the faults of the afflictions and then train in the commitment to not harm others, not come under the influence of the afflictions. And then at the same time, we recognize the benefits of the wholesome ways of thinking, particular minds such as love and compassion and developing a tender outlook towards others. Because these are seeds we all have as well, the seeds of the wholesome class, the virtuous seeds. And if we focus on those, we'll become more habituated to them. We'll become a gentler person, a more tender-hearted person. And this comes about through thinking, just like with the other class of minds, thinking of the benefits of being a more tender-hearted person, a gentler person, and then meditating in this way, strengthening these seeds. And this process is we need to focus on both sides, and as we focus ever more on the virtuous side, it also serves to weaken the non-virtuous side, just like the old-fashioned scale. As we chip away at the unwholesome side through recognizing its fault and its undesirability, and we add weight to the virtuous side, this quickly rises, and our unwholesome minds become weaker and less likely to arise, and when they do, have less strength and less duration. So this is the process we need to undertake, focusing on both sides. And in this way, we start to become the person we long to be.
Dine da ngana zu kisin she di re da nyamlen chewa chik ti kar re la da ngana zu laglen ta go ya di gi tu bi ke thalum de ji che de kar sen lunga yusun bon ye shen la ni ju ne ba chig me sem be don bi sem sam lo de ya ne ya tang go re se di chik ti ro da chik de khasang ngana zu kar sen kyam ro se di re kyam ro che go re se di dunga tha da le kyu bi ni ba di su ro yo sen kyam ne ko jo sum ba de yo re se yi chi che di kyam ro che wa de 제산디 겸르셔야지 가사에 가르스네 겹된 법아 산예기 아주 동아세야 탑람데 다 기능 거죠 아절이야 안니 냠렌제로 로제 디네 아주 삼로데야 다 삼로 고미야디 다 고미야 야네야도 공발에 디네 안 뉴바처던 최고조세도 귤에 아주 귤라 끼어도 아니 동아리아 줘야리아 and the Korea call it Dragiduchin, Targores, the Nizata Gabrache or Esadi, the Gabrache or Sadi, Manzuge, Manzu Geogoeg, Yamlin Choadida, Conjusuna, Gabrache to Gabrache or Esadi, Yamlin Chig Casandana, Dignity Casan Shesar, Casan in Shesare.
Thus far in our text, we've had two spiritual instructions presented in order to prepare for the time of death. The first is that of ethical restraint, where by restraining our mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions, we are engaging in cultivating the method to gain freedom from suffering and achieve lasting happiness, because ethics is the foundation of every attainment, of every good quality. Then the second spiritual instruction we've looked at is that turning our mind to think, who has the ability to protect us from suffering? That is the three jewels. With the Buddha jewel being the founder teacher, the teacher of the path to attain enlightenment. The third was that of the Sangha jewel, our companions in our training and spiritual development. And the actual refuge, the Dharma jewel, is what we, through taking the teachings from the Buddha and following the guidance of the Sangha jewel, we implement those, train our mind in this way, and generate the Dharma jewel, the actual refuge within ourselves, through attaining true paths and true cessations. And in this way, we attain protection from suffering, freedom from suffering, and we do so through our own endeavors.
고야디 가르제 마고야 삼라 가르세 디 야디리 디마 야직 디네시 모르 지거래 제사다 마하줄레 셈젠 탐제 랑지부 마이바 셈젠 탐제레 디두에게 삼로디 간스티어 이 가르치게 지게 삼로디 간스시 제사 마하줄레 야 라자 참말야 둥어여기 마하줄레 삼로디 간스치려고래 제사디 마하줄레 여바디 네 간스시어 파고르제 디니디다 냠렌제와디 디체고레 디파 도고레 세데 삼로 디냠렌지와 삼로 디도고레 세지 안데마 가상 삼로 방사진 디리다 삼다다야 야체와로 순고레.
Now we come to the next training. But this training can only be built on the foundation of what has already been presented. Because essentially, when we come to the next training, or the one we're about to start, the process is about expanding our awareness. Thus far, whilst developing the foundation, our focus has primarily been upon ourselves. Now, if we have developed this foundation well, we have the required basis to expand our awareness to all sentient beings. Because through these prior trainings, we've come to understand that we want happiness and to be freed from suffering. And we've come to understand the causes for suffering, the causes for happiness, and the method to achieve lasting happiness has as its foundation ethical restraint. And the way to do it is through relying on the three jewels and the teachings. That is our foundation. Now, we come to make our awareness far broader, far vaster, by taking our focus from our own situation to that of all sentient beings.
That's it. Chuteva Chimbe Zawani Sim Jachu Choto Jefferson Nedila Labar Nandinta Ranchis Bonwachi Shindu JS or that it Zawadi did it 60.
The 6th verse. The Buddha taught that the root of the Mahayana Dharma is the will to achieve supreme enlightenment. To attain this state, be especially diligent, and it is essential to abandon grasping at the cherished self.
Dan Chu Taba Chembe Zawani Sim Jachu Choto Jefferson Sidu Datsingidi Chu Sedi An Zuki Jina Chu Sedi Dangan Zu Mangwar in Dadi Negap Chu Sedi Dunga said and Digi Dubuki, Digi Dubuki Chu or what Chu said. Jina Dei Chugida, Denigis, Semjan Tamji Dondalia, Semjan Tamji Digi Dubuata, Semjan Tamji Dunga Segi, Sene, and the Sangi Kupon Toyegi. Jik Chugi, Zawa di Kare, Sene, Zawa Zaton, Ningbo di Kare Lana, and the Janju Choto Sim Gava di Resene, Janju Choto, yes, Sim Janju Choto, Gabra Sung, Sede, Janju Sim di Resene, and Dukum Kures, and San Yi Sumba Resore.
The term Dharma has many meanings. Here it is the meaning we usually use, which is that of being the method, the unmistaken method, to achieve lasting happiness and eradicate all suffering. And as the text says, the Buddha taught that the root or the foundation of the Mahayana Dharma is the will to achieve supreme enlightenment or bodhicitta.
Simjan Tamji Dona Sanju Kopon, Simjan Tamji Digi Tuya, the Dunga Sea, Di Dondala Simja Tamji Sanji Kopon, Tovia Delia, and Jig Tablam Lam Yamlin Mambu or the Dina de Zawadi, Zozo Zawadi Karela, Janju Show to Simki, Simki, Janju Sim said it is all that.
Within the Mahayana Dharma, there are many trainings that one engages in order to lead beings to a state of lasting happiness, in order to guide beings in eradicating all suffering. But the root of all these trainings is the will to achieve supreme enlightenment.
지난다 간주 삼다나 딜레디 용구로와다 지게 소수 대화데 되나 소수 중간에 세제 소수 되기다 되나 디고 샘비게 삼로제 용구로와 디 삼로디 지 충충으로 지에서 오르와다 다야 딜레야 자체되네 다지게 간주기 다지 자체되는 간주기 기합기 미디기데 지디기 야보지나 아니 대화지 이라도 동안 즉 주나 지기도 샨다도 마주나 땅 알아서 기합 미디 연구도 요선바이나 나한테 되었습니다. 개시하셔. 디나신다 지금 한주 미디게 차사 디기 연구도 동아세 디기 연구도 섬 샘제 샨다 dun조다 디스 삼마다제 미치보 삼다제 디기 연구 섬에서 내가 지금 미디 숙천보 망보여 와서 디디 삼로시라 개체와래제. 안 대소 되니게 삼로토네 안에 개와트 주비네 대소 상기 토빅이 규체고 말해서 상기 토빅을 줘도 말해서 제가 가르고고래서는 샘전 탐제 미 만족이 미나다 눈로이나다 하이나다 샘전 가르치나 차사다 말아서 나진 대화 되바다 동아 미디고 지바 눈로디기나 대화 되고로 동아 고고 말 하데기나 대화 고고로 동아 고고 말 아주 미데 지비지가래 차사 대화 되바 동아 미지바래 차사 되네자 샘전 탐제 대화다 된 고고도 샘전 탐제 동아다 자 고고도 되네 대인장의 샘전 탐제 동아나 자야나 디기 주에게 탑람 약쇼데 수 가르거래서는 상지 고파들이 지상에 심지어 탐지기도 상지 고파 토벌 지긴 셈베 삼로디다 삼로디베 마세 갸시쇼래 제래
The emphasis thus far has been on recognizing our innate yearning for happiness, in particular happiness that is lasting and stable, as well as recognizing our wish to gain freedom from problems and difficulties, both those slight as well as major ones. But this is a narrow approach. It's quite, one's mind is very focused on oneself. There's reference to others. But our primary concern is, I don't want to suffer. I want to have peace of mind. Here, now, in the Mahayana, one takes one's approach and expands that. And those who have, for example, a genuine wish for their community or their nation to experience happiness, they have a far broader mind, a far broader approach than those just focused on themselves. But they still exclude so many. Others who want all humans, every human throughout the world, to experience happiness, they have a fabulous broad attitude, but they still exclude many. And such an attitude, though, vastly superior to our own, is not a cause for enlightenment. It is not the root of the Mahayana. For that, one must have the genuine wish, may all sentient beings, whether they are human in this life, or animals in this life, or unseen beings, they are all the same. All of us are the same in wanting happiness and freedom from suffering. And generating a sincere wish, may all beings abide in happiness, leads us to the thought, what is the supreme form of happiness for them to attain? That of Buddhahood. Not of them, sorry. The supreme form of happiness for all beings to attain, so including ourselves, is that of Buddhahood. For that to be achieved, I need to become a Buddha right now, so that I can lead them in the most skilled of ways to their own freedom from misery.
지사다 장주 셈세데 가능식이 레고르세네 다 가르스네 셈젠 탐지기도 산여 고방 토벌쇼 셈비게 삼로디 당한주게 삼로디 이직 검제 다 장주 셈원이디 다 고데니게 좀 많이 바지 깨바이나 데니게 로딜라 장주 셈나고레 다 데니게 셈젠 탐산여 고방 토벌쇼 셈비게 삼로치 유반 좀 많이 바지 메네 셈젠 탐산여 고방 토벌쇼 셈비 삼로디 근데 되게 자주 셈디기 규차고 년龄이 규 차차로 전에다 되게 심지어 탐지상요 고바 토벌쇼 셈비게 삼로디다 좀 많이 봐 자주 셈라고 해지래 자주 조주 셈디 되게 셈게디 토네 개와 상요 고바도 자와 디레스 제산 되게 디군군어진에 개와 가르투베네 상요 고바도 상요 고바도 규차고 해서 자와 디레스 디스고 자와서 장주 셈세디 셈제 산주 고방 토벌쇼 셈베 삼부 쮸마 많이 받들어와 쮸마 많이 받겨라 당부 쮸마지 당아주길래 셈 토벌쇼 셈베 삼로 거르와다 다 되니게 삼로 당어 야네야도 나에도 쮸마 많이 받 차요 말데 마오바다디 쮸마 많이 받고 뭐 두고로 왔지 년龄이 규세고래 내가 배는 외쇼라지 어쇼르디가데 직제디가 고 pompo된 거내 차요 말와 이나고 외쇼 도구에 봐서 고 도구에는 마오바는 고 자고로 와 뒤로 자고로 와다 쮸마 많이 봐 당한주를 셈자 산주고 봐 토벌쇼 셈베 삼도 요르데 딩한주 규기다데 쮸마 많이 봐 차요 말와 이나디 야네야도 공발할 때네 기지 가르쳐서 마오바는 쮸마 많이 봐 차요도 고 장주 셈 차로 장주 년龄 규세고래 장주 셈 세야디 셈제 탐지기 산주고 봐 토벌쇼 셈베 삼바 좀 많이 받지 셈데라
Bodhicitta, the will to achieve supreme enlightenment, this mind is the root of the Mahayana Dharma. Bodhicitta itself can be divided in differing ways. But as it's first being generated, it is contrived. In other words, the practitioner has to make conscious effort to generate bodhicitta. They sit in meditation and they generate it. They do generate actual bodhicitta, but it is contrived, it's intentionally generated. This is a phenomenal achievement, but it's not yet sufficient to be the actual cause for the attainment of enlightenment is not yet sufficient for one to actually enter into the paths of the Mahayana Dharma. For this, one needs to continue meditating. But this contrived bodhicitta is nevertheless a substantial cause for when one generates uncontrived bodhicitta. In other words, where one has intentionally generated bodhicitta so often that one is now so familiar with it that it arrives spontaneously in an uncontrived manner without intentionally needing to generate it. That the substantial cause for uncontrived bodhicitta is contrived bodhicitta. And thereafter, when one has generated uncontrived bodhicitta, has entered into the paths of the Mahayana and is counted amongst bodhisattvas, everything that one does, says, thinks, is conjoined with bodhicitta. And why? Because it's uncontrived. It doesn't sometimes arise, sometimes not. And therefore, everything one does becomes a cause for enlightenment. So just like in our ordinary world, there's an election soon, and you'll all go and vote, and your votes are individually substantial causes for someone to be suitable to be called a politician, or someone who tried and didn't become a politician. So for us to become bodhisattvas, the substantial cause for us to create is contrived bodhicitta, and we keep reflecting on it until it becomes uncontrived.
지난달 심지어 담지기 된다라 상여 고바 토벌 쇼어세데 심지어 담지기 된다라 토벌 쇼어서마다 소소라랑이 된다라 상여 고바 토벌 쇼어섬 거 말와 지난 심지어 담지기 된다 상여 고바 토고 김전 가래 람나 심 상여 고바 토버세데 한도 가상 상여 권초스 최권초 상여 권초세데 나야 상여 권초 가상 한도 점조나네 상여 권초 접된 법세데 나야 되네기 접된 법보다 차오도 섬 거로다 디교고도 섬 거로와 지사다디 디 소수기 개방이 된다 삼등 거말 샘전 탐지기 된다 인식을다 가르rel라나 샘전 탐지기 된다 샘전 탐지 나나 하신 대화 되버도 둥어 미도버 찍버려샤 지사 샘전 탐지기 둥어 등이 세기 샘전 탐지기 디기 등이 두기 지사 샘전 탐지기 디기 두여도 둥어 세야디 조 삼로 디기와 샘전기 삼로 봐 야가다 누가 다들 알아서 봐나 삼내 야가릭 디레 두가릭 디레 파 모트제 콘서 냠는 제주 콘서 롭딘 제제 안디 아니 곧 냠는 제 타르 야사에 살고 우두스 동안에 세 우두스 제산 디 냠는 지 야고 제발라 라비알라 소소 야고 좀 마차바네 콘서 간에 야시 랍투 그래 제산 소수기 괜다 소소 강아요네 판도 야침부 제투 말에 제산 상계세의 괜 차상의 방사와래原来 차상 톱차와래 되니 이제 상기기 전에 된두발라야 다 강하게 요 말. 되니 이제 디나진다 신기 동아세야 디기두비 탑람 약쇼디 상기 고바디레샤. 진짜 디인장의 상기 고바 톱을 지긴 새벽에 삼다디 삼단 거래.
Both the cultivation as well as the abiding in bodhicitta is a mind that is focused on the welfare of all sentient beings. And it's radically different from how we currently think, with our focus primarily on ourselves. And this comes about through the accumulation of many causes, including those that we looked at yesterday in Refuge, where we have recognized the incomparable benefit that the Buddha jewel, Buddha Shakyamuni and all other Buddhas have brought into this world. The incomparable benefits they've brought to sentient beings. Recognizing this, and now valuing others, one generates this determination that I will become a Buddha. I will become a being counted amongst the Buddha jewel. And I will become such a being because such a being has perfected all good qualities. It's not merely that they are exceptional beings. Their qualities have been developed to the point of perfection. Moreover, all faults have been completely eradicated, so there's not even the slightest trace of a fault. And what is so beneficial about such a state is not one's own bliss, but then one is capable to guide all sentient beings, whomever they are, in the complete and unmistaken path, because one's own knowledge is complete and unmistaken, one's own experience based on that knowledge is complete and unmistaken, because one's good qualities are perfected and all faults are removed without a trace. I will become such a being. I will be counted amongst the Buddha jewel, and I will also be able to have such a remarkable and unparalleled impact on the lives of others.
That sometimes that and some gentlemen don't let you go see that you do good at the best and you go on to go reverse that I have sure that to Maria something at the Sigro. Denesi Yomarvada Sosoranagi, Yamlin Bezuchevena, top 2 years Chagore, Bene San Yujumne, Dambo, as Najir, San Yachayo Marva, Dambo, Najin, more corners higher there, the child. Deniza Koronzi, Yamlin Che, or some Tantu, Yamlin combat San Yokoba Tosoro. She said that the Rodan di Seburoshe, Benazuki, Lobjon Che, Carine. Member Kevas, Cindy Kevas, Lobjon Chictone, Carina Kevachayla, Dangwan, I make you in the Kevachan Leo Marua, and go Chunjun Magic, didn't magic, that wondering how lovely Casam Jello could Mutiji, Junji, Mutiji, Bezu Jang, didn't Kevas at the Gemana, that the Kevareta said the Keva the Chatu Chagoro water. She said the Nigi Jangdurchin, Kevachagobaina, Danzuki. Same you told the Lobjon Jangdorchine, San Yokoba to you about the Jibarwadi, or Sevuruchi Chatoyare.
So one gains experience of the endeavor, the effort required to transform our mind. One may well think the attainment of enlightenment, such a phenomenal goal, this cannot be easy, and is certainly not going to be swift. And that is true. And that is true. But we need, as always, to use our wisdom here. To reflect on our everyday life. When we were conceived in the womb, and after a passage of time were born, we had rather limited skills. Perhaps we could make loud noises and breathe, but beyond that, not much else. But between then and now, we have learned so many skills and talents. But at the start of learning all of these, we knew very little, if anything at all. At one point, we couldn't even walk. But later, we could make no sense of writing. We just saw lines. And every skill that we have learned, at one point, we couldn't even understand the very basics. And then we strived, and we became as skilled as our teachers. So too, Buddha Shakyamuni was once an ordinary being like us, overwhelmed by afflictions, dominated and controlled by attachment and anger and so forth. But when that being came to the point where he heard teachings like this, applied himself to them precisely in the way as presented, his process of transformation started. And he continued like this throughout lifetime after lifetime, eventually becoming this extraordinary being who has had such a marked impact on the life of many. So reflecting like that, we can be confident that all obstacles that we will encounter, we can overcome those. We can see them for what they are and move through them. And all endeavor and effort we place will bear fruit. So in this way, we can gain confidence and strength of mind.
Do Chinanga Zuki Jangler Chevena, Yakitra Yovache, Sanjoko to Yovadi, Sevore, Nezado, Sosugi do Sine, Chike do Sinyamen, Chiki Chevena, Ganzachilo, Sosugi, Yamyot on the Hawadu, or the Yanga, the Yarshisha, the Yarshisha, and Yamyot, Yamyot, and the Susara Hawadu.
With this and all meditations, we look at them through our own experience, and we continue to be aware of our developing experience. So referring to life events, as well as our own life events, like I've just said, our own training in this life, as well as our own developing inner experience as we engage and develop the Dharma within us. So through using both techniques, but primarily it comes down to observing ourselves and our experiences, we can see that transformation is attainable for all of us.
Dine zada chanju semsedi da geshimushures, dine zada nedila labar nandin dangas, nedila sid, dine ki chanju sem nyamlen chelpe, mas labar do delia nandin chen nyamlen chegures.
The third line, to attain the state, be especially diligent. So here this is encouraging us to be earnest, intense in our training, not to be lax.
다데네 당아주 베나아주 귤라 요르와 셈디 베나 산요고 톰나 셈비 삼르치도 요도 요르와다 간소치 요 연구르데 이네다 뉴베 침부스카요 말와다 요르와 자위기 아주 귤라 시자 자와데 사벌 마선의 충조지 요데레 지산다 아주 디 곰니 삼 땅이 되지 고 야기야 진이 아주 철시 따야리 마도 곧 자위기 사본증 아주 귤라 상이고 사이트 유튜브에 야고로 와서 베기 아주라 자위 삼로도 요래 아주길래.
I'm confident that all of you have the wish to become enlightened. You have the wish to become an extraordinary being and be of great benefit in this world. So we have this seed. This seed, though, we need to nurture, to make it stronger, so that it's not an occasional arisal of inspiration, but something that comes to dominate our every thought.
다디 아주게 달래 가른 것도 있는 거라서네. 지산 자유 셈세에 산지고 본토비규 자와디레스. 지산 디 nende주 공부 그래스. 디 고매기 계기 규사본 자와디 아주게 요레스. 삼로디 아주게 요레스에 송거와. 지산디 요바디 모르던 거. 디 삼로디 요바디 땅 아주게 야게 땅고 그래야지.
And key points to recognize thus far is that bodhicitta, the determination or the will to become enlightened, is the root of the Mahayana. This is what must be accomplished within oneself to enter into the paths, to attain the paths of the Mahayana. And to do so, one must ardently strive. It's not something that comes about through the mere occasional wish, but through ardent effort.
다데네 랑치진 랑제진 봉화 신도 제스 저산다 당아주길라 삼로치 요래지데 랑제진 삼로 소스 랑제진 삼로치 요래스 제디 파메 곧 민지 매와서 그래서 그래 배 매와서야 돼 예침부래서 랑제진 봉화 신도 제스.
For us, still, a dominant mind, an underlying motivation, is our self-cherishing attitude. Or to express it differently, grasping at the self as dear, grasping at ourself as dear. This is what we have to eradicate.
다 랑제징에 삼로서 랑제벌 진바시데 소소리 디기 주나 삼바다 소소 둥하다 자나 삼바다 소소 디기 주나 삼베 삼로디 랑제징 삼바서 랑제징 삼로.
The self-cherishing or grasping, or more literally, grasping at the self as dear, this is where we put our own needs first and foremost, no matter what we are doing, whether pursuing directly our self-interest or even with helping others. We put our own self-interest first.
Di ranji gyula yorese di yorwa da nganzu da di nganzu se wa ho da nga 기호 자오도 nga 디기 고고도 nga 동아 용고 고고 문도 선배 삼로디 nganzu 여바디 nganzu 배 세우 휴지하고 두고 도와디 대시 심전 탐지도 나라 산지고 뭐 토고도 선배 삼로디 저희 충충주어데 nganzu 샤라고도 가브렐리아 안지게 산지기 어디에 톰네 야구로 와서 배 삼마도 지게 세우라 샤라샤라 거의 하고도 가서는 충충지 마도 매가라 랑지 삼로디 슉 첨보를 지어 반자 nganzu 세우 통도 하고 두고 와.
When we're honest with ourselves, we can recognize this actually quite easily, that the self-cherishing attitude or grasping at our cherished self is the prime motivator behind every thought and action. I want happiness. I don't want to suffer. And from that comes all our thoughts, speech, and behavior. We do, though, have the seeds of the other cherishing mind, or again, to translate it differently, apprehending others as dear. We have these seeds, but they are weak.
Rang chasing some no said, so digi chuna sembe, so you do not the China sabi, so pay out what is some jebats and be jebats and jidan, some of the ranches, some of the niche. Din now, Yanji got shook chishunta, Kashi bed ranches, some shook chawa, Kashi does chunwa, Yanji rang chasing said, lo loche in Hayunguri, that dinala rang chasing like the lo loche, and in Bayunguri, that loche member Yunguri, Nika Yunguri. Rang chasing some lotilla, Dinana, Kashi ranches, some shuk chambu, Kashi shuk chung chung. That Kashi ranches, some said, lo loche imba, lo loche Yunguri. Loche imba, Niga yore, loche inke yore, menga yore, Niga yore, so that dinadilwa.
The grasping at the cherished self, the self-cherishing mind. It's very dominant, very strong within us, overwhelming. Other times, it's much weaker, less dominant. Also, the self-cherishing attitude is sometimes a wrong consciousness, and other times it's not a wrong consciousness.
Rang chasing, rang said, nga lagurwa, nga said, nga dela, Mazamdata New Yorba, nga said, Ngajida Yoba chit, nga said, nga Yoba chicks yorwa. Nga said, ya samda chile, nga rashin juba nane, nga rashin juba dela me at yorba. Rang chasing said, rang said, nga lagur. Nga dela mine, jabber simba, but dela digi yapod kudi, jiaku and be jabber simba. Rang la mine jabber since rang la mie, rang dela, rang when you to be not to get ngala mia jita, tangy to yubiki, ngala mie, niungore. Tangy to yuba, jita no yoba. Nga said the Ngalkalas and Jorua, nga yobaji, tangy to yoba, tangy kunzup to yoba, tangy to yoba, ngadela, miaji, ranches chikungure. Tang rang said the young, other rangadi now you do. Kanglama rang when you tuba nangora, the niggy ngadela mini or jabatimbachu, di jabatimba di tensiries or dakasan on the shed. Chesa ranches and some lonella, lo shed and loshe nika yungur like him.
The self-cherishing mind, or grasping at the cherished self, this can be at times is a wrong consciousness, and at times it's not a wrong consciousness. So the times you'd say it's not a wrong consciousness, or firstly, so the self-cherishing mind, or more literally, this grasping at the cherished self. So it is the self or the I, and there is an I that in general one can say exists. That's the I that's sitting, the I that's listening. I am hungry, I'm going here, I'm going there. The way we generally talk about the self. So this is a self that one can say that exists. And the self-cherishing mind in relation to that self, to that I, is not a wrong consciousness. Where it is a wrong consciousness is where the I or the self is grasped at existing in the way that it appears. This is that is a wrong consciousness. It's also called self-grasping or true grasping, and when it's referring to the self-grasping mind or the mind of true grasping, that as an expression of the self-cherishing mind is a wrong consciousness, because it grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears when it does not. Therefore, it's not in accordance with reality, and it's a wrong consciousness. The other grasping at the cherished self that is not considered a wrong consciousness is in reference to the I or the self that we generally refer to. I'm sitting, I'm walking, and so forth.
Now, the name is that rang chasing some of your race. Just that rang chasing is some of the Sanji Gopon Tobola, and the rang chasing some of the Meva so Mato, rang chasing is some of the Meva Masuna, Sanji Gopon to my research.
In order to achieve enlightenment, one has to completely eradicate this grasping at the cherished self. Completely eradicate it. Without doing so, Buddhahood is not possible.
제가 랑진지 삼도다 나랑 디기고도 나랑 아니 디기고 랑이 소소라 동하다 자고도 셈비 삼로 주여바이나 셈젠 탐제기 된다라 동아 셈젠 탐질에 디기고도 셈비게 삼로디 바시치고 그래서 야기 좋아라 바시치고 그래 제가 디네자 디 랑진지 삼로디 매바서 그래서 디레 가서 자슈 셈디 게알이야 바시치고 그래.
And the reason is because at the moment, beings like us who are under the control of the self-cherishing attitude, our focus is on the happiness we want to experience and our own freedom from suffering. And this then clearly is an obstacle to thinking or conceiving, prioritizing the happiness of others, the freedom from suffering of others. So when one is self-focused, foremost, primarily, this is a severe impediment to thinking about the happiness of others in a way that is sincere and genuine, where their needs will be placed first.
랑치 삼로된 리기레스 제산다든 가르줄이야 가령 오트 지워서는 랑치 등의 소수규라 랑치 삼로시 두아스 제산디 랑치 삼로디기 동아 망보지 가르줄이야 동아 망보 영해리 규디 끼엔디 티치고레스 되샤게야레 콩로게야레 나야게야레 아니지기 셴헬이야 고허다야레 셴헬 준시야레 아니지기 셴헬이야 통중다야레 지차상 도신 랑치 삼바테네 리고레스 제사다 랑치 삼바텔레테네 둥아 야야레리고레스 제사 디파 메바소고레스 랑치 삼바 메바소고레스 다디 도초라 카레요스는 가서 고야레 셴제바심베 삼로세데 셴다디기 디기도 셴 둥아다 자고 셴디기도 댕고도 삼베 삼로디 셴제 지지 삼바레 디 나조야 나주길레 요레스 디 뭐 공부데 땅고레스 하지.
It's grasping at our cherished self that is the source of all our suffering and all our misery, which is quite remarkable when you think about it, in that grasping at myself first, wanting to be happy and freed of suffering, that is the attitude that leads to all our suffering, our pain and our misery. And this is because grasping at ourself as being dear is the source from which all our afflictions arise. Our anger, our attachment, pride and jealousy all comes from placing ourselves first and foremost. All our lying to others, our deceiving and taking advantage of them, of not valuing them, this comes from placing ourselves first and foremost, cherishing ourselves as dear. And this has to be eradicated. The contrary mind is the other cherishing mind, apprehending others as dear. This is completely the opposite. It's placing others first and foremost, their needs, their welfare first and foremost. This is what we need to cultivate.
지사다 랑치생의 삼로티네 아니치기 동아요다 콘로다 되샤다 동아요와 차사이 디용고레 제대 셴리아 체와체야다 뇌바체 강아테야 디용고레 지사 랑신니가를 동아요에 랑치생 들리기래 제르와 다가는스 리기도 세뱅안서 삼로스다베나 랑치생 세데 나랑 직 디기 고구도 세베 소설이야 야고 고구 선배직 여러 제생이 쑥 첨부 줘베나 소속이 디기 주야래 미션다지기 되스 바시 양의 바시 모습 제바 하는 모습 맞제바나 소설이 독발 디잉알 바시 제사를 선비 독과사와나 남사 딜야 안남 유딩 그러하다 미 디기 주야래 바시 선비 남사 콘라야다 콜야지게 남유돼야다 디디호를 직등 거로하다 콘을 내용으로 제사 데네자다 디체 아니야 지금 랑체 섬도 랑체진 쇼다 나 디기 나야고 고스면도 직지 잘하신다가 어디 랑아 세야 나야고 고도 섬에서 어디 알고 고스베 유딜이야 차바게 대 유디 마죽도 안데 야나 고마고야다 야네 안에 초좀 제하다. 야네 지게 제하디 탑람 가니시나 라에게 탑을 배주시기로. 제가 데니치도 베누쿠마고에도 초좀 제바이나 데나라신이가라 강알리고로. 제가 랑제징이 소소게 삼로 랑배 제바진 진바이나 지난 델레 때는 아주 되자게야 콘로게야 지난다 나게게서 랑지 나야고 그거 섬여도 소수기 연대 어서는 나시우지 다 콘솔레 나야가 임바서 두고 삼고 섬비체선데 콘솔샤를 통조제야 나게게 리고래 지난 디네자 뉴모바디에 제 도스진이 리고래스 디네자 랑지질레 되는 아주게 강아 용다 된데 용고래 세순고래와
to recognize how it is our consciousness, our mind, that grasps at ourself as dear, is the source of all our unwanted pain and misery. We need to look at we need to look at the role our self-cherishing attitude plays in our life. So the statement is, it's the root cause of all our suffering because all our afflictions arise from the self-cherishing attitude. So let's look at some examples to hopefully make this clear. So from the thought, I want to be happy, comes the thought, from the wish, I want to be happy, comes the thought, I want things to go my way, because then I will be happy. And from this, a wide array of desires and wants come. And should someone obstruct any of these, immediately afflictions come. So what's the thought of I want to be happy? We're grasping at ourselves, cherishing ourselves, and we now attach to whatever it is that we want. Wanting things to go our way, people to agree with us, be praised, whatever it may be. Then, should someone obstruct us, further afflictions to the attachment and the self-cherishing arise. We will get frustrated at this obstruction. We may even get angry at them and express it, and confrontation ensues. This process started with cherishing ourselves first and foremost. Similarly, wanting my dear self to be happy, attachment arises for things that we believe will bring happiness to this cherished self. And we'll do whatever it takes to get it. We may lie to others, deceive others, steal what is not ours. Again, we see how non-virtuous behavior, physical or verbal behavior, follows from the mind of attachment coming from the self-cherishing attitude. Again, I want to be happy. This cherished self, its happiness, I value first and foremost. So from this self-cherishing attitude, pride may arise when we recognize someone else as having qualities that either we long for or we see as challenging us in some way. So from the self-cherishing, pride arises, competitiveness towards others arises. And the outcome is a distance between ourselves and others, a sense of alienation between ourselves and others. So through these illustrations, we see how from cherishing ourselves, grasping at ourselves as dear, thereby we want our happiness first and foremost. And this is already a arisal of afflictions, and then all the plethora of afflictions follow, and harmful activity.
And in it, I do sometimes minimum do much about to push your head and the corner they do to the kind of lang do some jig that medium and other to show and Jiki medium the mutu number chambuyo bachile mutum bachawa, machan bachawa that kind of young do some being and the dumbo some much now in that dumbo and it been as a DJ was need to over yours. Need benefit the Zemorasina, need the most DJ to go to Michi di me la roda. Chita Kalaina da Karine, Chita Sosuke Rang di Jehudu Sebi Nitambo, said some of the Rang Jebazi. Chisa did you the thing he do but did do go and begin double to your Shuchimus legal. So that Miri Sosa Dever, 소소 되버 찍고 두고서 해야만 투에 갖고 와. 제가 되는 소소랑 진삼도 소소기 되버 두고야 그 숙침부 주되가블라 파저 미디기 소소 되버데 켈 맞아베나 될에 미튼 바시 제기나 되네 신의 콜마가와 기야다. 코로 콩로 기야 돼. 제가 콜마가와 기야 돼. 콩로 기야 돼. 매천 받쳐야돼. 또 그래서 당보 소소랑 알래. 아세베 삼노체. 나디 제호스베딘 되버 두고데 삼노 숙침부 레디 파초디 디 나즈 되버 디데 미튼 바 파초디기 제야도 되네 될야 콩라 디 미튼 바차다. 이제 되네 콩라이도 칸에 치수시야바 동면 넘겨돼야 아니면 딜레 두르셔나 라베가 쉬야 되네 천재 천기 봐 제 쉬야다 되네 있어야다 되네 게 딜리고라 제가 두스 삼다도 제가 디두스에 저 삼르트나 랑 제바지 막 마세삼 소수기 되버데 배 담도지 디 전다마르디 뭔디 아니 될야 콘롤야데 미든 바차데 강아체데 데니치 리우도 와서는 아주 두스 심주제나 라바로 지나서 데 하고 두고도 하데
Further illustration is to look at situations in your own life where relationships are disharmonious. And the root cause of relationships, either whether they've always been disharmonious or whether you no longer get on but used to, the root cause is the same: grasping at ourself as dear, wanting our own happiness first and foremost. To take a small illustration, if you with a friend have made a plan to go to a restaurant and enjoy a delicious meal, and you're looking forward to it, and you have a strong wish, tonight I really feel like a particular type of food. Depending or in direct relation to the strength of your attachment, the strength of your desire to enjoy that particular meal, that is in direct relation to your self-cherishing mind. And in such a case, particularly where it's strong, you will not even be aware that the other person may have a wish of their own to go to a different restaurant, for example. Or if they do, then express that wish, you'll readily dismiss it and encourage them, coerce them to act in accordance with your own wishes. And that is how we live our lives. It's how people around us live their lives. If one were the only person like that, others would deal with you just fine. The problem is, they too have their self-cherishing mind. They too have their own wishes. There are things they value. And whilst the example of food is very minor, you can think of many other illustrations, whether it's about views or behavior, things that you value dearly. When those wishes are not in harmony, either immediately an argument may follow, or the one person suppresses their own desires to give in to yours. And if they do this often enough, resentment builds and disharmony follows. So in this way too, from our own lives, we see how the self-cherishing attitude destroys relationships with others and prevents us from being genuinely close to others, but always ensures that there's a distance between ourselves and others.
대상은 미 계를 소소라랑 이나래 다 초보지 이나래 안데 지가 편주 이나래 진짜 랑기 삼로티 랑아세 삼로고 진짜 나랑 지진디 대랑 지진디기 니 제고스비 되와 지어로다 딩이디 미니디 아주 미 계를 편주 미니네 되바디 니가 튠바이나 미디 전부 샤그로와 되바디 미튠바이나 되네 고 삼로šan다 다마tum나 되네 고 투부셔야다 뒤로와 네 지소 베네 초보하리나 되네래 네 지게 지소이나 나가로와 지소 투부쳐야 돼 소소 니기 되바니 되바디 미튠딩 지기 랑제즈 쟁이 디제고서 지게라지 디제고서 딩이도 되바메디 마찬가지야 얘가 편지 마셔야 돼로 얘가 소소한 등아지 디제고서 베게 삼때 파줘야 되게 되바디 켈리메지도 되네 투부져야 되네 마셔야 돼 제가 디삼로게 되바 미튠 봐자 소소게 랑 되바디 소소게 딩이디 민이디 되바니디 민이 고라 되바 튠바 주바이나 되네 거기 전부래 지소야 나이네 곧 찾아 되바 튠바 주바네 전부래 얘가 편지나 고라니기 되바디 튠바 주바네 얘가 투부져 전부 사고로 와대 단다디 곧 가지래 가지고 마찬 바쳐서 이 가지고 것은 소수기 되버디다 미튠 바직 퍼져들지도 미튠 바지도 가서 투부야디 용. 디 투부야 용어는 랑치징에 삼로 숙체라게 이긴 용거래제.
The role that grasping at the self as dear plays is destructive, whether it's on the level of between individuals, or on the level between groups, between society, or on the level of between nations. Whichever perspective one looks at, we see that where individuals or groups or nations act in accordance with the wishes of others mutually, those relationships are harmonious. They see them as mutually beneficial. In this way, for ourselves as individuals, we will get on with someone because our wishes are in accordance, are in harmony, and therefore we have a relationship that is mutually beneficial, and we enjoy each other's time with each other because our needs are being met. So too with groups within society or between nations. But when wishes are not in harmony, and one of the parties pushes their own desires to the fore, and from this ends up dominating the other, conflict will arise. Disharmony follows, conflict follows. And this we can see in interpersonal relationships, between groups in society that perhaps once were harmonious and now are othered, or between nations, where there will be conflict over trade or militarily. And at the root of all of this is placing oneself first, one's own happiness first and foremost.
Dine dang ang zuge rang chi sing samlo de shuk chung dang gu re che chisan chan shu sem de gyu le ge ba che gu re che da domye di nga zuge la rang chi sing samlo chyor di ma shuk chung dang gu re chisan da nga zu ko ye di nyamlen che ga de ga sen shuk cher da ya ga sen simje tamje gi dön da la san ye ko ma to ba shi gi sen be samlo di nga zu le shuk cher dang gu re se da di ring gi chi chi di lobjong di nga zuge ko he di da jeri che de ga re sen chan shu sem di 아주 충충지 여바디 파죽죽 철철다 누버철다 제리제 디 누버철다 제리 누버철다도 제리제 다랑 나주길라 랑 지진 삼로 슈첨부 여바디 파 누버 충충충 파 누버 충을 따야디 어두스네 냠len제디 순코르다디.
So the conclusion of this verse then is to recognize, as in these previous points, that only harm comes from the self-cherishing mind, and that it is the source of all suffering and misery in the world. And reflecting on this again and again leads to a sincere determination to eradicate it. And also, we recognize that to do so is essential for the attainment of Buddhahood. And in order to eradicate this self-cherishing mind, we develop the other cherishing mind, which we translated differently. We apprehend others as dear. We come to value others, value the fulfillment of their needs. And again, we can use the analogy of the old-fashioned scale. And on the one side, we have the self-cherishing attitude, the other cherishing attitude. And right now, the weight is very much on the side of the self-cherishing. But as we recognize the faults that it brings, we start to weaken it. As we develop our determination to not come under the influence of the self-cherishing attitude in our activities, we weaken the side of the scale. And in conjunction, as we meditate on the other side of the scale, valuing others, cherishing others, apprehending them as dear, this side of the scale grows in weight, and this side of the scale lightens in weight. And in this way, we start to transform our mind and develop an attitude that is primarily concerned with the welfare of others.
Dine zadang anze jogege dadi tat juge chanju sem kom che di yar ke tang gore se da ra chi sing samlo de da nga juge la yobadi ti ma shuk chung tang gore se ti ma shu bare da dine zadang anze juge ra chi sing chanju sem di ya shuk 땅나 슉처 땅야라 곰나다 간에 간진 곰 야게 땅고 그래. 다 란지지 매봐서 봐라 삼로 가르트 곰제 매봐서 그래. 세지 내용으로 와다. 인자디 간주디 많이 고절로 마시죠.
Then this afternoon, we'll come to look at the techniques to weaken this cherishing ourselves, this self-cherishing mind, and to strengthen the other cherishing mind, the mind that apprehends others as dear. So we'll look at those techniques then this afternoon.
디저 간주게 삼로디게다 간주디 나달랍지체에 가서 차상 삼로 나나고 지게 데네데네 땅고래 데네데네 삼로디 땅고래 세디 삼로 나나 셈짱짱 주어 나나고 순고르다 마도다 지치네 안에 잘라디네 주고래 안에 유디네 주고래 세다 디치 주고 순고마 제상아주 디유주비에게 자와디 안 셈인자 안에 델테네 도스치네 안에 제리체고를 삼로디 땅고래 세디 삼로 주어 나나 돈을 주고 순고르다 제 디네자 나주게 셈들랑 아주 삼로 나라 삼로 릭데네 치거디 디야고요 말다 디 셈데니스도아 디야고요레 디야게 땅고디 곰고래 세디 땅아주게 셈마손에 약도디 바 ngotweche 디제네 약고요레 디제네 약고요 말레스 디 약메바 디 메바스요 고레스 디 약고요 디 영한주 냠는 제고 공부도 땅고레스 제자다 공부도 땅야다 이 메바스요 땅간데스요 고레 곧 야게 땅나간데 땅고레스 세디 나 탑람디 아주 디난 마순고로와 제자 디 니레.
To emphasize again that the meaning of Buddhist practice is training your mind, transforming your mind. Buddhist practice isn't an external activity, it is an internal activity. And this is because the attainment of happiness comes through developing one's mind. Eradication of suffering comes through developing one's mind. The processes that are presented here, one can explain as being techniques to come to know yourself, come to recognize who you are, and then to take the knowledge gained and apply it to yourself, to develop oneself into the person one has the capacity to be. Taking the knowledge we are acquiring and applying it to our own mind through seeing which mental processes, which minds are harmful, they're afflictions. They are harmful to ourselves and to others. And then applying the techniques to eradicate them. And going along with that, coming to recognize which minds are beneficial for ourselves and others. And then strengthening them within ourselves. So this, in its entirety, is a mental process. And this afternoon we'll continue to look at how to train our mind to fulfill our own inner potential. So we'll complete here for this morning. Thank you. If you have some questions, then feel free to ask.
I'm too short. It's not so much a question, but just clarifying an understanding of what I thought I heard. So the self-cherishing that is the cause of our suffering is described as when we cherish a self that exists from its own side and it appears wrongly, a self that is inherently existent. So if we are, say, dear and appreciate and warm towards a self that is changing moment to moment, that doesn't exist from its own side, that is impermanent and dependent arising, that kind of self-cherishing isn't a source of suffering. I'm wondering if that's the right understanding.
Okay. So you're just wanting to confirm your understanding of a point. So the self-cherishing that is the source of all suffering is, just to add, that wrong consciousness that grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears. And so that self-cherishing is the wrong consciousness and the source of all our suffering. But then I forget the verb, is it okay or suitable to cherish the other self, the dependent self, the self that changes momentarily? Is that beneficial to do? Oh, is that also a cause of suffering? Okay, thank you. Then also Gyatso, also Rangchen die Lokshe Rangchen der also Rangchen Sempa, der Lokshe Mete Rangchen der also ganz akte kom vitafare nicht so dann zu dann wie du bei der Sopa die nur nicht so dann tubo die also Namden Rangchen ganz akte Rangchen sind der la Sina oder der Chepa Sina der Dugnogi Yang der oder der Yang Dugnogi
della tene dunga yungore niga yungore.
Yes, so from both types of self-cherishing, the one where the self is in the one that is a wrong consciousness, and the self-cherishing that is not a wrong consciousness, from both of them, suffering arises.
ngaranzu tabula yungores. Tayaji dadidi lam nyamlin chede inia lam gyuleki eduke ane chige ya papi kansa nyendue da rangya da deneki tu papi kansa tisulya rangche sin se de sosora nga da yoba nga rang se joro ji da yoba joro dela min rangche ba zime ji yor de ina dela tine konsulya dunga sha yu tu ma de karsan konsugi nya kom 제 냠는 지두고로 당아주 로시라 다 dunro 당아주 냠는 되니까 메디컬라 다 나주게다 에 덴지 라체진나다 덴지 마이바 라체진디 델라테네 나주게 동아모 부투 리고레스 가서 되샤다 콘도도 녀모 보모 지두고레스 자주 semba 인나데 년도다 라냐 파비 람 냠는 지간 디슈 디솔라 데랑 janshi senpa la rangchi sin samlo diyo ma re tatete chesa meni nyendwe da rangye pape kansa tiso soso rangi tachunpe dribo tokukudu rangi digi tokukudu senpe samlo yorde ina rangchi sin diyo yorde ina digi konsolya dunga ya nyugyo ma re kosa karasan lam nyamlenchi ni tukorwa.
The answer I just gave is relevant for us. Those us, like most in the world, who are ordinary beings, who have not generated an uncontrived path in their continuum. For those who have generated an uncontrived path in their continuum, whether bodhisattvas, hearers, or solitary realizers of any class, their self-cherishing that is not a wrong consciousness does not cause suffering. So for bodhisattvas, they're not under the influence of the self-cherishing mind. They are bodhisattvas, they're under the influence of the other cherishing mind. And for those who are hearers and solitary realizers, they have the determination, I will attain liberation from suffering. I will attain lasting happiness and freedom from my suffering. So because such a being who has generated a path in their continuum, that self-cherishing, which is not a wrong consciousness, does not cause suffering.
그래서 랑진지게 삼로 디토네 나랑솔로 송급 제다지로 동아 영야랴 송급 제다다 디기두에게 탑람 줍타지어와 줍타지어 나랑주게 랑진지 삼로 디기 디 탑람 줍타디하고 신고 말에 랑진지 대대 년도에다 랑제다 람 냠는 지긴 디기 랑진지 요르데 랑진지 또 나랑 디기두에다 랑 동아 세고서 비기 삼로 땅데 랑진지 요르데 디기 동아 세야다 디기두에 탑람 신고래 나도 마신 바인자 아니 나도 라지를 때는 동아기 오래 거기 신경절라 라지를 때는 동아기 오 말해.
And the reason for this difference between hearers and solitary realizers who are on a path and ourselves is, well, whilst we are the same in wanting happiness and to be freed from suffering, and we engage in all our endeavors to bring this about, they clearly know the path or the method to do so, and therefore their physical, verbal, mental activities are in accordance with the path that actually produces happiness. We tend not to. We tend to still be quite deluded in our confusion, and thereby our motivation is highly tainted.
Gabriel has a ranch in the Gabriel has a digit to tell you what Dunga say to you that digit to tell you what Penanga Jiki chulo chenpo kyawedo oda nga kanga chesere nga di shisere nga martin sede chigo rangachin samlo di chulo kyado ba nga sansan ba tabshita chilo ba nyenga mesal duen benda de rangachin jige sungkyo jige oro ba chulo jigiro wa chulo jabne de na chu gangaji shi ru ro chesa oda di chulo jigire nga de benda kanga chegire di shi ru re dele de nyele pa jogo sembe samda de rangachin jige samjero ba nga digi godo nga kanga chigma chesare chisa dele 타고 선배 삼다 라지 삼다je and ko jinga mesa ba nga sasan twenjobe dine kanga dele segoro ba chesa gabriel nga zo rachi sin samlo digi nga zo digi tu yore dunga se tu gore gabriel nga zo rachi sin samlo digi kanga mongbu chi gore chesa rachi sin samlo gidi ne ke na dunga yongure segoro ma da nga zo yongya de nga zo le peros ma so rang mitun ba chaya da shan le chawa chaya da nyobi ge che nga zu ge rang chi sin de le li go re ma do rang chi sin de ge di na dung yong gu re sa ya ma ba ge di na je rang chi sam o da nga shi do sa nga dung se wo sin be men jue ji ne le ta ya yo ro ba je da rang chi sam de ji mi ji ge di na dung ya ma de gi ya du go re dung yong gu nga zu le da di ya se wo re ma zen rang chi sam de ge di na dung yong se sam de.
Your question has inspired me to actually make a key point I haven't made yet, and that's the self-cherishing mind does not necessarily lead to creating the causes for suffering. For example, when under the influence of a virtuous mind, we create merit. And another illustration would be, for example, if one is living somewhere where there's a flood, and you recognize my life is in danger. So we would express this, I want to be happy, I don't want to suffer, and whilst that's not the thought arising to the person, it is the underlying motivation. So therefore, to save their dear life, their precious life, they will flee from this danger. That is not creating non-virtue. They are acting under the influence of the self-cherishing mind, but they are not creating non-virtue.
Yeah, that is.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more? Sure.
Yeah, just a quick one. I just want to clarify, when you say wrong consciousness, so therefore for a self-cherishing mind, that is not a wrong consciousness, you see, because it says I exist, yeah? And then if we say I exist in the way it appears, that is wrong consciousness. So I'm thinking, I'm always, when we say I, we have this sort of come together with I appear, I exist. So how do we sort of separate this element about that's not a wrong consciousness and that I appear as it's a wrong consciousness?
So the question then is, between these two self-cherishings, the one that's a wrong consciousness and the one that is not, how does one differentiate? Because we always appear to mind as being truly existent, as existing the way they appear, and therefore it's a wrong consciousness. So how do we differentiate with a self-cherishing that is not a wrong consciousness?
Yeah, because like the word appears doesn't seem to, be constantly in my mind.
Yes.
I appear. Why do I have to appear again?
Okay.
Tisada di dewa che di jidan dangar du samdang ngar zo lo ya cha de gang lai ma de rang ngwen de zhe nang go ro rang de nang go ro ga sa na de rang ngwen de zhe nang go ro na wa na xin da ga la re sam be sam lo sho ro ba di rang chi sin lo lo she de le da di ngan zu se ba gu tu ma de lan ji re di ya gu ji sam dang go ya go m ro ji de sam lo ya gu ma de ne di ngan zu ha gu tu ma re this language ma do yoma language da ngan zo gi deni ge nang zo na wa de nang zo di ji da 낭수디 많이 낭낭도 랑원도 주변에 나와 나가는什么 되니게 낭수디 삼마다와지 지단은 어디가 칼라사고요 나래가요 나데데요 나주고요 선배 삼로셔와 이 낭수딜 파상 나와 나신 레섬고 말해 섬고 말와 지사다 나 세대 나 칼라사고 나 롭존 지고 나 주고요 나 세 삼로셔와 니 랑 제가 나 칼라서 나 야고고도 나 야고 차고도 나 롭존 야고 차고서 베랑 나 야고고스랑 제진 저와 디 랑제진 나디 제바침에 삼로디 더 로셔 말해서다 이 가슴에 나와나지 나가라리 섬고 말와데 당아줄에 삼로 가르스는데 랑제진 로셔 많이 봐 삼로 등아주 숙체요 됐어 내가 저거 하고 돼요 랑제진기 로셔 인가 나와나지 레섬비 삼로지 아주 한지래 세상 아주 네 됐디야 됐어 삼마다네 하고 도 말해.
For us, of these two types of self-grasping, the one that is not the wrong consciousness is the one we are most familiar with. This is the one that appears to mind most. Because the thought of, when we're thinking of ourselves, oh, I want to go there, I'm glad I came here, I'm looking forward to lunch, this thinking of I is not the self, it is a self-cherishing, but not the wrong consciousness type. This is how we generally think of the self. But when we think, how does the self really appear? And then, does it exist in this way that appears or not? So when that self, there's the appearance of the self as being truly existent, and we grasp at it as existing in this way, this is a wrong consciousness. This doesn't readily arise for us because we don't often think about this. And that way of thinking, though, so firstly, the self appearing as being truly existent, or existing in the way that it appears, this is something that we don't really get yet, because it's something that it innately arises. It's something we're so habituated to, it's almost invisible. So we don't really get it yet. We get some extent on an intellectual level, but not as I'm seeing the appearance of true existence, not there yet. So that then is the wrong consciousness type of self-grasping, where we grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears, of self-cherishing, sorry. So this for us is much less common than the self-cherishing that is not a wrong consciousness and the general way we think of ourselves. Okay? Okay, good, thank you.